Social and environmental issues have been key in the mining industry for a long time. How do you see the sort of evolution and the trends around measuring and understanding these impacts playing out?
That's right, Julie. I mean, we often focus on the negatives of the mining industry, and those are very difficult to measure. If we look at the positive side of the mining industry, look at contribution to GDP in our country, 6 to 8%. If you look at total tax revenue for the country from direct taxes and mining royalties, more than 100 billion. Employment, more than 470,000 employees. You can see it's easy to measure some of the positives. It's also hard to measure some of the positives in the industry. If you look at the infrastructure development that mining companies often do, which benefit their host communities. And here we think about transport, we think about hospital, healthcare, we think about water, education, and not only building that infrastructure, but supporting that infrastructure to make sure that there are adequate doctors, adequate teachers, and so on in the community. Easy to measure what was spent on it, not so easy to measure the real impact that those interventions have. And the industry on the environmental side, yes, negative impact. We can see the disturbance when we drive around in the country. We know there are emissions, you can see the chimneys going. And measuring perhaps the direct emissions or measuring the direct area of disturbance, not that difficult, but to really quantify that impact on a monetary basis, but also on how do we add that into the mix when we assess the positives with the negatives is quite difficult. But I think you've got a model that helps us in evaluating that on a net P&L type impact.
Yeah, so that's right. So what we look at is a total impact assessment. So we look at the environmental, the social, and the economic. And the basis of that really is to quantify those impacts, to reduce that information to a monetary value so that companies can then make informed decisions. It can be done at a company level, at a project level, at an initiative level. So for example, in order to understand their just energy transition plans and to understand the impacts of that, the social and labour plans, as well as things even like the implications of the energy trilemma. So from an environmental perspective, we would look at things like the emissions, the social cost of carbon, various other sort of issues that would be then built into our model to quantify that. From a social perspective, we look at the return on investment, we look at the impacts, direct, indirect, and induced, and then are able to reduce this to a monetary value to really so that companies can make informed decisions. Because what we often find is that organizations, by doing activities, they think that they're having an impact, but actually the impacts are something else. So it's almost like you take a stone and throw it into a pond, and the ripples, that is really what we're looking at from an impact perspective. So it's much broader, and once it's quantified, it's really helpful for organizations to use that information to make decisions, allocate capital, guide their strategy.
Yeah, and that sounds fantastic. So it provides a holistic view on a position. It provides, if I understand it correctly, in a very transparent manner, because that the outcome of that impact assessment then needs to be communicated, both for the internal decision makers, when they measure it, they can get it done, but also to the users of the financial statements and the public at large, the stakeholders. They can see how what that impact is and how companies track against the promises that they make.
That's right, yeah. And from the energy trilemma perspective, so in terms of the trilemmas as far as it relates to mining, how do you see that sort of relate to impact measurement and management of impact, and how do you see that playing out with your clients?
Yes, I suppose energy is very topical at the moment and a very relative one. And when we talk about the energy trilemma, we talk about, on the one side, the security of supply, something that we're really battling with in South Africa and our wider African context. We look at the affordability of the supply, something that is often a challenge, especially when you have limited supply. And then we look at the environmental impact of supply. So our coal-fired power plants, lots of emissions, not so good for the environment. but essential to supply security. If you're a mining company, you need to assess your energy plan within that trilemma. Now, it's very important for a mining company to continue operating despite the load reduction challenges that Eskom provides the mining industry with. And what mining companies do is they invest heavily in renewable infrastructure, but they also invest heavily in diesel generator backup power for the industry. The wind doesn't blow always, but Eskom could be down any time, and they need to be able to get workers out from underground. You cannot shut down a smelter for long term. You need to have backup power for that. And the industry has been very well focused on ensuring security of supply. There's a lot of focus on the environmental aspect of power generated, well, emissions and environmental impact of the mining industry as a whole. And that's why the investment has quite often been in the renewable space for the mining industry, to make sure that that additional power that they add to their supply is coming from renewable sources, and therefore it's green and it doesn't impact negatively the environmental impact. Affordability is a real challenge though. Mining companies are not meant to worry about electricity supply. It would be great if that can be done on an aggregated basis for the country, and we've had that. The benefit of Eskom when it was functioning and could provide energy to the mining industry and industry at last at a competitive cost, but on a reliable basis, meant that this country moved forward in a big way. So it would be great if we can get to a situation where affordability comes down, because you do add supply on an aggregated basis and not on a piece-by-piece basis by mining companies.
Okay. And then for that, I mean, I would imagine then that understanding the impacts of all three of those components is really important in making
Absolutely,
those decisions.
yeah. And again, you can put numbers to the affordability side of it quite easily. You know the capital that you put in, you know the maintenance costs that you put in. On the emission side, it can be measured, but then putting that or condensing that into a net impact or total impact assessment is key.
Yeah. And in terms of the social and labour plans, that's also a big issue in the mining industry. I mean, how does sort of measuring or how do companies kind of navigate that challenge of being able to measure and quantify the impacts of their social and labour plans?
Yeah, again, mining companies are forced in terms of their mining licenses in order to have a social labour plan in place. The labour plan is agreed with a number of stakeholders, including the DMRE, host communities and so on. And they have to deliver on that. There's no doubt about that. And mining companies in general do deliver on their social labour plans. One can ask delivery in terms of their social labour plans is really as optimal as it could be. Again, tracking the investment that you made is easy. The money that you spend is easy. Perhaps the people that you are influencing or impacting is easy to count. But really having that full holistic induced impact is not that easy. So if, as a mining company, I put up massive lighting in the informal community that originated outside the mining gates, that has a very positive impact on the ability from a safety and security point of view for people to move around after dark in the community. It has a positive impact from a learning and education point of view, because there's light which people can learn and study, but not that easy to measure. And your model has got a ability to look at and at least try and quantify the benefits of it.
Yeah, because impacts are, I mean, they're not always direct. They're often indirect and induced, and being able to quantify them actually then allows companies to share this narrative and this story of the whole value that they are actually contributing.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much, Andries.